following is true. It's a true story. It actually happened. But it's probably happened 1,000 times, not once. There's a person that I'm involved with who has challenges, who has struggles, like so many of us do, like all of us do. And we were once chatting, we were talking, and he said to me that the greatest blessing in my life is this referring to the challenge, a particular challenge that he had. And I was taken aback, I was shocked, because that challenge is formidable. It's a great challenge. And I said to him, why would you say something like that? Why would you say that this terrible pain and hardship in your life is the greatest blessing? So without hesitating, he said to me, because if I didn't have this challenge, I wouldn't be the person I am. And he proceeded to explain to me how much he benefited, how much he gained because of this particular challenge that he has. This is an idea, the concept of growth from challenge is an idea which is axiomatic, it's fundamental, it's basic to life, and it's certainly basic to Yiddishkeit. There's an old expression that necessity breeds innovation. People don't do things unless they must. And if people didn't must, they wouldn't do. Or said in other words, in an ideal world, in a perfect world, in a pre-Adam and Chave eating from Eitz Hadas Tevara world, people would be motivated to do the right thing, or would do the right thing because it's right. The reality of human nature in general, and the reality of human nature in our times especially, is that people only work because they must. And unfortunately, there are so many people who have very serious challenges, and I don't mean financial challenges, I mean emotional challenges, I mean finding happiness challenges, and so forth, that in some cases those challenges challenge them. They feel like they're being destroyed by them. But in other instances, people embrace those challenges. They accept the challenge that the Eibishter is giving them, which forces them to work hard. And of course, anytime a person works hard, in addition to working hard on whatever it is they're working on, they're also working hard on themselves. The challenges of life are our greatest blessing, because it's the basis and the creation of our life. The fact of life is that if anything is meaningful, it's hard. The Gemara says, Asya de Mogen b'Mogen, Mogen Asya, a doctor who heals for free is worthless. Everything has a cost. And the more expensive it is, the more costly it is, the more rewarding it is. And of course, in America, we think of cost in terms of dollars and cents, but the most profound cost is neshama, is kishkis, is your own soul, your own guts, that you have to throw into a particular circumstance, a particular challenge, a certain scenario, and so forth. So, challenge, which nobody seeks, right? Al tavayeni ledeini soyim. We ask Hashem not to test us, but when challenge finds us and we stand up to that challenge, we accept, we take the challenge, and we struggle with the challenge and deal with the challenge and hopefully conquer the challenge, makes us into the person that we are, and it gives us the greatest rewards in the world, beginning with a meaningful self-identity, and then of course a meaningful spouse, a real deep relationship with our spouse, and ultimately the greatest blessing of all, the blessing of children, the blessing of nachas, and the blessing of subsequent generations. All of these things are very, very costly, emotionally, spiritually, on a human level, and when we embrace those challenges, when we deal with those challenges, they improve us, they make us better. This is an idea that the Rebbe repeated so many times. There's so many siches that you watch periodically, where the Rebbe is making the point that Hashem is kind. Hashem is tachas hatov. Hashem is the ultimate kindness, the ultimate goodness. And the question therefore becomes, if God is so good, why does He make it so difficult? And the answer that the Rebbe gives is that if the Eibishter made it easy, it would be meaningless. In other words, the Eibishter doesn't want that it should be nama de chisufa, it should be bread of shame, it should be undeserved, unearned. The Eibusha doesn't want that it should be lamasi adecha tichseif, the Rebbe would frequently say. Hashem wishes that what He has should be based on the efforts He invested, which is in humanity, and that what humanity has should be based on what humanity has earned and humanity has achieved through their own avodah, through their own efforts, and so forth and so on. This idea was the point of the Maamar Rabim, which is in the beginning of Torah Or in Parshas Noach that we learned, 5 years ago perhaps. The Maamar talks about Maamar Rabim, liyuchel lechabes es ha'ahava unhadis layishtafuha. And the point of the Maamar Rabim is that tirdes hapanasa, the preoccupation with panasa, is exhausting emotionally and spiritually. And the pasuk says, "Maamar Rabim liyuchel lechabes es ha'ahava unhadis layishtafuha." Every Jew has a natural love, has a pinta liyid, an inner ahava for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all the waters in the world, all the challenges in the world, all the preoccupations in the world cannot wash away that love that he has for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Maamar began with this initial statement that what's the meaning of Maamar Rabim leyuchel lechabes es ahava, that the love that a Jew has for God is stronger than any challenge. In other words, we're always in a position to win the challenge that we have been given and that we face and that we have to deal with and so on. But shortly into the Maamar, the Rebbe added another dimension. And there's this second dimension, which is really the true significance of the pasuk, Maamar Rabim liyuchel lechabes es ahava. And the second point that Rebbe made is that we don't only survive these challenges, we thrive because of the challenges. And the Rebbe qualified it by bringing the pasuk that calls the Mabul Mei Neach, ki Mei Neach zeisli. The waters of the flood of the Mabul are called Mei Neach. And the question that the Rebbe raises is that everybody knows that the Mabul, the flood, was a deluge, was a disaster, destroyed the world, was a negative thing. And Noach means to rest. Noach means peace. Noach means harmony. Noach means comfort. How can you call the Mabul Mei Noach? And the answer that the Rebbe gives is that when one goes through a Mabul and survives that Mabul, they achieve something that without the Mabul they would never have. And the Rebbe gave the example taka from Parnasa. And he said that the way Parnasa works is that Parnasa challenges us, and when a person deals with the challenges of Parnasa the way a Jew is supposed to, and lives as a Jew is supposed to, notwithstanding the Nisanis of Parnasa, he's better for it. So it isn't only that you survive the Maamar Rabim of Tirdes HaParnasa, you thrive because of them. And the Rebbe went as far as to suggest that in certain aspects, the balesek, the business person, the person who's in the real world, in quotations, earning a living directly, achieves more by being a Jew in this world in spite of his hardships than a Ben Torah. The davening of a balesek, a businessman who's out in the world, and he faces all kinds of challenges, including the challenge that he's not involved in holiness directly, and serves Hashem in spite of it, is not being a Jew in spite of it, he's being a Jew because of it. It actually makes him better. And that was the content, that was the spirit, that was the neshama of the Maamar Rabim liyuchel lechabes es ha'ahava and the hardest layishtafuha that we learned a few years ago. And of course he tied it into the Mishnah, that Yafashah achas b'tshuva ma'asim tevim be'elam hazeh mikol chaya elam haba, that in this world we can achieve something which is impossible to achieve in Gan Eden. Even though Gan Eden is so holy and so pure and so delightful, and this world is so challenging, but it is these challenges that bring out levels of the neshama and possibilities in the neshama that the neshama in Gan Eden cannot bring out. And therefore, living in this world, and particularly living in this world as a balesek, as a businessman, can reveal powers within the neshama that the neshama in Gan Eden cannot reveal, can reveal powers in the neshama that even the neshama of a Ben Torah on this earth cannot reveal. And this is the reason for the Tirdes HaParnasa. The Eibishter made it challenging because of the good that it extracts from us. And of course, this reminds me of the famous comment of the Rebbe. When the Rebbe was asked all those years ago, why is it that shluchim have to be fundraisers? Couldn't there be some other accommodation made? that the Eibusher could provide the parnasa from heaven like Maamar Beuir. And the Rebbe said many points, or several points, and one of the things the Rebbe said is if we didn't have to raise funds, how would we reach those Jews? Those richest of Jews, which are in a isolated environment or situation or community, and they're hard to access. They're hard to access physically, they're hard to access emotionally. When we are forced to reach out to those people because we simply need their support, we need their help, we need their resources, and we reach out to them and we encourage them to help the work that the Rebbe wants Shluchim to do, so they're Mekad of those people. So it's exactly this, Meineach Zeisvi, the Tirdas HaParnasa, the Mayim Rabim, brings out an additional blessing that would not be available otherwise. And this, in short, is a summary of the Mayim and Mayim Rabim. I just want to mention the Hayom Yom, which you know, I'm sure, that the Rebbe Marash once said to the famous Chassid, Rebbe Ella Beller, who was a businessman and traveled in the markets and so on. Ella, ich bin dir mekan, Eli, I'm jealous of you. That when you're in the middle of a business day, and you stop, and you talk about Hashem and Hashgacha Pratis, and the Rachma Volkol Maisav, all of the heavens are jealous of you. A businessman who's in the real world, first of all, it's a well-known idea that a businessman sees Hashgacha Pratis much more than a Yeshiva. A businessman sees the hand of God in his life far more than a Talmudist and a Yeshiva Bach. And when you bring the Eibishter into your business and into the Chitzonius Dika, the external environment in which you're in, you're making an incredible Kiddush Hashem. And this is the Maila of Abal Asik over Yeshiva. It's part of the advantage of being a businessman, over being one who is sitting and learning Torah day and night. And in the Mayim Rabim, one of the ideas that the Alter Rebbe referenced or mentioned was the idea that the tefillah, that the davening of a Baal Asik could be higher than the tefillah of a Yeshiva. Being a businessman and being out in the world and davening without allowing the preoccupations of the business to take you away from how davening is supposed to be can bring out a depth within you that it would never bring out of a person who's sitting and learning Torah Yom V'Layla, day and night. So this was the Maamar we learned then. Now we're learning the Beuir on that Maamar. Over the years that we're learning Likutei Torah and Torah Or, we've done very few Beurim. I'm not looking that far into the future where I'm going to be able to say that one day we'll be out of my morim, all we're going to learn the Beurim. We have plenty of Chassidus left to learn Likutei Torah and Torah Or on Ashir. But we decided this year to do this Beuir on this Maamar. So I just want to say a thought or two about a Beuir, although we've talked about what a Beuir is on earlier occasions because we've already met and learned several. Number one, the Alter Rebbe's style of saying Chassidus was they didn't carry it over from week to week. There was no concept as a hemshach. He would never say a Maamar one week and continue it the next week. Each week with its own mitzvahs, based on Parshas Hashavua and whatever the case was. And accordingly, if the Alter Rebbe said a Maamar, it was unclear, the Chassidim would ask, particularly the Mittler Rebbe and the other great Chassidim, and the Alter Rebbe would say a Beuir, a commentary, and the commentaries usually happen on the same Shabbos. And if the Beuir wasn't enough, there'd be a Beuir leBeuir, a clarification of the clarification, a commentary on the commentary. And if that wasn't enough, you would have on rare occasions a Beuir leBeuir, a clarification of the clarification of the clarification. But this was the style of the Alter Rebbe. He would say a Maamar, and if the Chassidim did not understand, he would add immediately a Beuir. There's a cute story. At the Mittler Rebbe came to the Alter Rebbe and he said he didn't understand his Maamar. And the Alter Rebbe ignored him, did not respond. The Alter Rebbe was supposed to say, okay, I'll say a Beuir. The Alter Rebbe didn't respond. So the Mittler Rebbe got physically sick. And the Alter Rebbe's Rebbetzin, Rabbanas HaTzedkana Stene, went into her husband and said, I don't understand. Battle is nish gesund. Your son is not well. And all he wants from you is Chassidus. Chassidus you have on a shir on a brek, give him. So Alter Rebbe smiled and told his Rebbetzin to zog Battle as al sich nit sorgen should sein der Beuir. Tell Battle not to worry, I'm going to say the Beuir. But the Beurim were on the same Shabbos, more or less. When you learn the Beurim of the Alter Rebbe, there are occasions where the Beuir reads like a new Maamar. In other words, just like the original Maamar was said, there's another Maamar being said on the same topic. There are instances, at least this is what seems to me, I've never confirmed this with experts, but this is what seems to me, where the Beuir is almost like notes. The Chassidim heard the Maamar, They came with a list of questions. They would ask a question, he would answer. Ask a question, he would answer. And sometimes in the beer you could see that's exactly how it looks. It's a series of short conversations stacked one on top of the other as reflecting the original Maamar that the Alter Rebbe addressed based on the questions that the people asked him. This Maamar, the first half for sure reads like a Maamar. The Alter Rebbe is explaining what he said in the last Maamar as a comprehensive Maamar. He's not just saying notes. But it seems to me also that at least a part of this Maamar seems to conform to this model where the Alter Rebbe is addressing individual things that he said, that people did not fully understand, that he's addressing, that he's trying to explain point after point after point, as we're going to see tonight and we're going to see in Mitzvah Hashem in later classes. Lahavin ha'inyin, we must understand shetfilas habal eisek yeh b'madrega gaveya v'chulu, that it's possible that the davening of a business person should be even in a higher madrege than the davening of a yeshivel, of a ben Torah, someone who's sitting and learning Torah day and night. And of course, the reason is because there's challenge. And he doesn't allow the challenge to prevent him from davening. To the contrary, his entire davening is a meditation on that the truth of the challenge is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Says the Rebbe, so this is a biur where the Alter Rebbe is going to further develop the idea which he explained in the Maamar proper. We must begin by explaining the significance of the neshamah's descent into the guf and into the world. That the neshama is a spark of godliness and it's put into this world. And of course, the way it's explained in so many Maamar Chassidus, the very fact that the neshama is in this world is already a golus. But in addition to that, there is sometimes a golus, b'teich golus, and even a golus, b'teich golus, b'teich golus. That in this world we're in a guf, and we're in nefesh habahamis, we're in a body and an animal soul. Liyis tarud tamid, to be constantly preoccupied, b'machshavos, with thoughts. Moreover, with v'dayas hapanasa, worries about panasa, behev li'elam hazeh, in the trivialities, in the lack of substance, which makes up Elam Hazeh, and the Alter Rebbe says, "V'zehu Yerida Gedel." This is a terrible Yerid. It's a terrible decline. So the neshama finds itself in a world that's presenting it with a perspective that's prioritizing something which is really hevel and completely consuming this person. Says the Rebbe in line 7, it must be said, it must be true, that this Yerida is Tzerech Aliyah, that when the neshama descends into this world, and moreover it has to be busy with making a living, it has to be Yerida Tzerech Aliyah. In other words, that once and after that the neshama descended and was manifest in a body and an animal soul, to chalales maila, it will be in a position to ascend higher and higher still. Aidei ahafta b'chol meidecha, it'll achieve a love which is with all of its might, says the Alter Rebbe, shubali gavul, which has no limit. And the achieving of an infinite love is based on the challenges that this world presents. In other words, if you're living in a spiritual world and involved with HaKadosh Baruch Hu without interference, so the ahava will be natural and therefore limited. But when the neshama has to overcome, has to compensate for the challenges of this world and serves Hashem in spite of those challenges, the love that it reveals, it's infinite. Kemaim is like it says in Chazal about the days of creation, Vayhi Vekir, Vayara Lakim Kitayv, Vayara Lakim Kitayv, and so forth. And on Friday it says Vihine Tev Miyet. Says the Chazal, Tev ze Malach Chayim Me'ed ze Malach Amavis V'chulu, which is a really odd medrash when you take it superficially. Good is the Malach of life, very good, or Ma'id, very is the Malach of death. And of course the explanation that's found in Chassidus is it's not that very good is death, very good is the idea of transforming Yisr Ne'er Miteicha Cheshech, Yisr Nechachma Min HaSichlus, when one transforms the Malach HaMavis into Chayim, it's greater than Chayim itself. Says the Rebbe, V'zehu Davka, this is only achieved, Aidei Ha'ahava, when one has a love. Haba, Minefesh HaBahamith, which comes from the animal soul, K'mei Shonoreim Lamata, as we see in this world. That animals are stronger than people, like the classic Lashon. V'rav tfuas b'keach sheir. Animals are simple. They're not complex. They're not sophisticated. They're not nuanced. And as a consequence, they have incredible sheer force, sheer power. The nefesh abahamis is also not nuanced. It's also not complex. And therefore, the will of the animal soul is even stronger than the will of the neshama. And when one harnesses the nefesh abahamis, the animal soul in Avodas Hashem, it exceeds what the godly soul can do. And in this case, it's the tirdas haparnasa that squeeze this out, so to speak. And he explains, Kmekein lamayla omar adad. That's also a pshat in the Gemara. That a place where a Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik doesn't stand. And of course, you also have the famous wording of the Rambam, Einam yochelim lamed, cannot stand. And as I've told you many times over the years, that in the Gemara there's actually two opinions, whether a Baal Tshuva is higher than a tzaddik, or a tzaddik is higher than a Baal Tshuva. But the Rambam paskins like that opinion that says that a Baal Tshuva is higher than a tzaddik. And not only does the Rambam say that a Baal Tshuva is higher than a tzaddik, but the Rambam says that where a Baal Tshuva is, a tzaddik cannot be. And then you have also the Lashon Hazayah. V'hainim mipnei shabachin as Baal Tshuva, because the category of Baal Tshuva, who's running from evil as opposed to running towards good, is b'chei layat, is with extra power, extra strength. So therefore, this is true Api Nigla in the Rambam, and it's true Api Kabbalah, that the Baal Tshuva exceeds the tzaddik because of the challenges. Ubekeach v'his gabrus godl, with incredible strength, and with the incredible his gabrus, overcoming challenge and doing the right thing. What is the reason that the Baal Asik, who serves Hashem in this life, and in spite of the fact that he's a businessman or a professional, Yiddishkeit is the essence and the center of his world, and the thing that matters most is his connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And his davening, and therefore in his davening he exceeds even that of a tzaddik, even that of a ben Torah. And the reason is because shebechinas nefesh abahamis, this particular person's world involves his animal soul, and when one transforms the animal soul, is greater than when one gives HaKadosh Baruch Hu the divine soul. Because nefesh abahamis and bechinas elamateo, the animal soul comes from teo. And the Rebbe briefly mentions the classic question of elamateo and elamatikon. Like it says in the pasuk of Eilam, the pasuk says that there are kings that ruled before the Jewish people had kings, and in each case it says in the pasuk Vayamas Vayimlach, the king died and was replaced by another king, and the king died and was replaced by another king, and it's brought in Kisvei Harizal that this description in the end of the Parshas Vayishlach of Vayamas Vayimlach is an allusion to the Sfiras of Elamateo. That the Sfiras of Elamateo cannot tolerate one another, and in order for a second Sfira to be born, the first Sfira has to die. There is no mutual interconnectedness, there's no mutual inter-involvement. Ubachinas hatehu, the world of Tehu, which is a world of kings that cannot tolerate one another. But on the other hand, it's in a world of extreme, it's a world of infinity, is Lamaylam, Bechinas Tikkun, is higher than the Madreg of Tikkun Meshikos, it says in that pasuk, Asher Malchu Lefnei Melach Melech Abnei Yisrael, before Yidden had a king, before Kedusha had a king, Klippa had a king, and the nature of Klippa's kings is that it's Ksorim, it's Makifim, and they can't tolerate one another. Mashenkin, the kings of Kedusha can achieve harmony and Achtos, Shu Bechinas Tikkun. Now, we've been learning Maamarim for years, and we've had so many opportunities to talk about Elam HaTehu and talk about Elam HaTikkun. So I'm not going to give you a long repetition of an idea that we've discussed many times, but a few words in Tehu and Tikkun are called for. The difference in Elam HaTehu and Elam HaTikkun is this. Elam HaTikkun is a limited world, but it's a balanced world. In Elam HaTikkun, everything has a place. There's what's called Hiskalalus, as you'll see inside momentarily. In Elam HaTikkun, because of its limitation and because of its balance, it's called an Adam, a person, a man, a human being. What is the trademark of Adam? The trademark of Adam is that he includes everything inside of himself. The highest levels, the lowest levels, the extreme right, the extreme left, and everything in between. And in Kedusha, in Elam HaTikkun, in Adam, all of the things converge in a healthy way. Elam HaTayhu, on the other hand, is an extreme world. It's not limited, it's infinite. In other words, the power of Elam HaTayhu is far greater than the power of Elam HaTikun. But the nature of Elam HaTayhu is that it's not balanced, it's extreme. In other words, in Elam HaTikun, you have a balance of all midas in a measured way. In Elam HaTayhu, you have certain midas in a very, very extreme way. So when Elam HaTayhu is good, it's far better than Elam HaTikun. But when Elam HaTayhu is bad, it's far worse than Elam HaTikun. Because its shadish is higher and it's fallen lower. And that's exactly the point of this Maamar, that the Tirdas HaParnasa access Tehu after it's fallen and bring a person back up to Tehu as it is in its shadish. So when a person is involved in Tirdas HaParnasa, they're involved in something which is obviously lower than Teda Mitzvahs, lower than Yiddishkeit. But when they overcome those challenges and turn those challenges around and see the blessing and the challenge that the Eibishter gives, so that the davening has far more meaning and more purpose and so forth and so on, so then the Tayu becomes turned around and becomes even higher than Tikkun, which is the basic point of the Baal Esek being higher than the Yeshavel. So the Rebbe says on line 18, Ulahavin calls that to explain the idea that being involved in Parnasa is involvement in Klipa. And that the Shadish of Klipa is Elam HaTayhu. And winning that challenge reveals the Shadish which makes a person in a Madrega higher than Tikkun, at least in a certain respect. So the Rebbe brings an example. Hine Isa b'Medrash, it says in Medrash, B'tchila, when the Eibishter created the world in the first place, the Eibishter's original intention was to create the world with the measure of judgment. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw the world was not to be able to sustain itself. So what did the Eibishter do? Shitav midas harachma v'chulu. He hybrided, he synthesized midas hadin with compassion, with mercy, that it should be sustainable. Now, what's the Parsha the Pshat in this Medrash? Yeah, that's of course in the Hemshech Ranat. What's the Parsha the Pshat in this Medrash? The Parsha the Pshat in this Medrash is that the Eibishter created the world with great concealment. Why? Because as we said earlier, the whole point is Lamasi Adecha Tichsev. The whole point is Yagaito Matzasa Tamin. So the harder it is, the more meaningful it is. So the Eibishter creates a world with maximum concealment. He's hidden completely. The more he's concealed, the harder it is for us to find him. And the harder it is for us to find him, the more meaningful it is once we find him. That's the Parsha Pshat in the Medrash. So according to this reading of the Medrash, Midas Hadin goes on Tzimtzum, concealment, Gvuras. Says the Medrash Vaiter, Rosh and Elam Miskayim, Shitef Ime Midas Harachim. God Almighty sees that it's not realistic. It would be nice if Hashem could hide completely and man will find him, but the Eibishter discovered that if he hides himself completely, man is not even going to look for him. So there has to be a Shitef Ime Midas Harachim, a hybridizing, a synthesizing of Din and Rachamim. Enough rachamim for a person to be interested in the Eibishter, and enough din for a person to have to seek him, and only then is there a world that's constructive and going to bring to a certain end. So this is the classic understanding of this very, very famous Medrash, that Hashem hides as much as possible, so that we should have to seek him, but he cannot hide too much because he wants us to continue looking for him, and so forth and so on. This is the Pshat in Medrash. Here, the Rebbe brings a slightly different Pshat. It's not necessarily contradictory of what I said, but it is different. And I want to repeat again. According to what I just told you, Midas Hadin means Tzimtzum. Midas Hadin means Hashem is hiding. And because Midas Hadin means Hashem is hiding, and Midas Hadin means Hashem is Tzimtzum, we have to look for him. And when it's too difficult for looking for him, so Shitef Ime Midas Harachim. Here in this Maamar, the Rebbe brings a different touch. Says the Rebbe on line 20, Ve'ein HaPirush, the meaning of the words B'tchila Olab Machshava Livrei Seila Midas Hadin, that the original plan, the Eibishter created the world with din. The meaning is not Kamesha Ha'elam, same as the world says, which is what I told you about a minute ago. Shamidas Hadinu B'chinas Tzimtzum, that din means contraction, Umaniyas Hashba, holding back a flow of life. That's not the Pshat. Din and Gevura does not mean Hashem is hiding. Why not? Gevura is one of the Eibishter's midas. So if Hashem is hiding, that hiding is actually a form of revelation. It says in the pasuk that the Eibishter is in possession of all 10 midas and all 10 spheres are all bottled to him. Shem Es says spheres da Atzilus. So it's a reference to the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Hamachayim umahavim, that give life and creation. Me'ayin, from a non-existential state, liyesh, into an actual existential state. The world, and since Midas HaGevura is one of the Eibishter's Midas, and the Eibishter is revealed in his Midas, Gevura can't be tzimtzum. Or in the words of Yiger in Sharichet V'Emunah, Hein Hein Gevura Isav. Just like Chesed is Midas Hashem, and just like Gedula is Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Gevura is also Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hein Hein Gevura Isav. So Gevura can't be to conceal and to hide. It means to reveal Hashem in a way of Midas HaGevura. Because Gevura, like Chesed, is a gili of the Eibishter. Ve'ed, another proof to this idea that Gevura can't mean hiding and contracting, but rather means revealing through a midah of Gevura, is in Iksiv, the Pasuk says, Ki Adamu HaNefesh. The blood of the person is the will of the person, is the life of the person. And by the way, sometimes it doesn't say Adam Hu HaNefesh. It says Nefesh Habasa Badam, and yet this is one of those famous contradictions. Is the Nefesh itself blood, or is the Nefesh finding itself within the blood? The primary life of a person is blood. And we know V'dam Nimshach Mebechinas Gevura Midas Hadin. Blood comes from Gevura. Like you have in Chassidus and Teirei talking about Basa B'Cholov, that from the blood becomes the Cholov, and this is the transformation from Gevura to Chesed, as they state in Teirei talking. So, since Gevura is one of Hashem's midas, and the midas of Hashem all reveal Hashem, it's impossible to say that midas HaGevura just means concealment and hiding, but rather, line 25 now, Ella, but rather, HaPirush midas Adin. What does midas Adin mean? Hu bechinas Gevura. It means strength. And what does strength mean? Lashon Takbeides. Hashem gives too much. Not Gevura, Hashem hides, and that the purpose for the hiding is that we should seek Him, but that Hashem gives in an incredibly concentrated way, too much. But the reality is going to be the same. When somebody is given by the Eibishter too much, they cannot receive what they're given, and they end up being in darkness. That when the Eibishter gives Midas HaGevura, it's explained in this Maimed, the power of the life and the light of Ein Sof, which comes to the person of Midas HaGevura, as Yossi, Midas HaChesed is more than Chesed. Why? Because Midas HaChesed is soft. Midas HaChesed is gentle. And because Midas HaChesed is given in a soft and gentle way, therefore, Shu Nimshach Lamata Mata comes all the way into this world, because Aval Hu B'Abba B'Chinas Kiris, because it becomes coldly. Like it's brought Taka in Chassidus, B'Negea to Geshem, Zecher of Nimshach Acharecha Kamayim. That Avraham Avinu is called of Nimshach Acharecha Kamayim. We have different ovis. Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevura, Yankel is Teferes. And of Nimshach Acharecha Kamayim goes on Avraham Avinu, Midas Ha'ahava, and we compare the Midas Ha'ahava to Mayim. So it says in Chassidus that this means that it's soft. Love is a wonderful emotion, but it's an emotion that's weak. Gevura may not always be such a wonderful emotion, but it's incredibly powerful. So the Taich Midas HaGevura and this Mayim is that Hashem gave too much. So the Medrash says, Hashem wanted to create a world to blow us away with Midas Hadin. And what happens? When Hashem gives us too much, we end up with nothing. When Hashem does giving, offering, through Midas HaGevura, Shabbat HaChayis made in soft, that the vitality comes from the Ein Sof Biz Gaber Shrav, made with incredible force, with incredible power. And the Rebbe therefore says, Al Kain Memela. When Hashem gives with incredible gevuras, when Hashem gives too much, what happens as a consequence? When through the chain reaction of worlds, this oir of gevura and judgment descends below, nasa bechinas din, automatically becomes judging. When Hashem gives too much, when Hashem gives too powerfully, when Hashem gives us too much intensity down here in this world, there is a need from din. And what is the din? One who's not worthy of receiving this flow, cannot receive it. It's too powerful. You know what it reminds me of? What it says in the Pasuk, that when Mashiach comes, the Gemara in the Pasuk, HaKadosh Baruch Hu meitzi chama min hateka. Mashiach is going to come, Hashem takes the sun out of its sheath, tzaddikim nizainim ba, and the Rishayim are going to be punished from it. When it's too strong, if you're deserving, you're getting more than you would otherwise get. And if you're not deserving, it's destructive. So what's the type? That Hashem is going to give the world so much that the world is going to be judged by it, and then the world is unsustainable. Well, kindness is because the life comes much colder, and therefore can be drawn below as well. Says the Rebbe, Avol Bechinas Gevura, the Gevuras we're now describing, that come into the world with such a force, that as a consequence of coming with such a force, those who don't deserve get judged out. Hu hachayis beis gabros. This life comes with incredible power, which is bechina zayin malachim for the 7 kings. In other words, v'hu elam ateu comes from the world of Teu. So here we have another chiddush gadol, right? When we say the medrash, betchila olav machshava livers elam midas hadin, rosh ein elam eskayim shita means sarach. How do we understand it? Din means tzimtzum, and chesed means gilui. Here we're saying din means takbeiris and chesed means chalishas. But moreover, we're saying that din and chesed are not both midas of tikkun. It's not that chesed is a midah of kedusha and gevurah is a midah of kedusha. Chesed is a midah of kedusha. And the takbeiris of gevurah is a midah of klipa. So there are several differences in how we're in this maimir reading this medrash than we typically do. First of all, metchila Allah machshava livers elam midas hadin means takbeiris, too much. And second of all, the nature of the too much we're describing is coming from Elam Ateu. In other words, there's Gevur and Kedusha also. But this is not Gevur and Kedusha, this Gevur comes from Klippas. This is why the 10 Sfiras in Elam Ateu are called kings, because the job of a king is to come with incredible amount of power, force. And another idea which is brought in Chassidus, that a king has to come with a crown, Keser. And Elam Ateu was Ksadim. Ksadim means no light or life or energy that you get from Elam Ateu ever fuses and becomes one with Tikkun. V'alpi ha-Kabbalah mevuar. In the language of Kabbalah, it's explained as follows: Shebechinas ha-Tehu. The realm, the reality of Tehu, is a world which is not Adam, it's not balance and integration, but it's extreme. Huri b'ya'er o miyat kelim. It's in too much light, a light which is too intense. It's a gili of atzmus hus of ein sof umiyat kelim. The vessels are too small, as opposed to bechinas hatikkun. While in the world of tikkun, who behepech, that there's miyut kelim and ribuy. Pardon me, miyut eid and ribuy kelim. The vessels are broader and the light is less, and therefore it's sustainable. Pirush ribuy eid. What is the meaning of a lot of light? As it is in Elam Hateu, it's not only a lot of it, but sha'er v'achayis babis gabrus rav. The light of Teyu comes with an incredible amount of force, like the Gevuras described before. Kikol hayud sfiras, each and every one of the 10 sfiras, as they are in Elam Hateu, hayu b'takbeidas rav, an incredible force. Kamay, for example, bechinas chesed, the midah of chesed, but chesed in Elam Hateu, hayu midas chesed b'his gabrus rav. Chesed had an incredible amount of force. V'chein kol hayud sfiras, this was true in each and every one of the 10 sfiras, that the incredible is gabrus. What happens when something is given with an incredible amount of force? It's not at all recognizing and reckoning with the vessel into which it must be manifest. And if it's not recognizing and reckoning with the vessel in which it needs to be manifest, it's not sustainable. It doesn't stay there. It's like taking a shot glass and putting it up to a fire hydrant that's gushing gallons of water a minute. No water is going to remain in the cup. It's too much force. So the chiddush of shitef imei midas hadin and this maimed, that it's a takbeidas of Elam Hateu. V'gam, in addition, besides for the fact that every single midah gets chayes with an incredible amount of takbeidas. Lachein la'ya yeskal l'samidas. This explains why there's no integration and interconnected between the midas. Liyas kolul chesed gevura, that chesed and gevura could be joined, as we discussed many times over the years. That an Elam Hatikun, the chiddush of Elam Hatikun is that each midah has within itself all the other midas, and as a result, there's an incredible amount of integration and interconnectedness in the hiskalalus. The chesed within the gevura is meeting the gevura within the chesed, and so forth and so on, and they join together in a very healthy, integrated system. But in Elam Hateu that cannot happen. Every category and every measure is so strong and so intense. Therefore he cannot join with its counterpart. Each midah is by itself. That's what Elam Ateu is. So therefore we have Azoi. The Medrash says, Hashem wanted to create the world with judgment. He saw that it's unsustainable, so he added Midas HaRachamim. So we normally say Midas Hadin means tzimtzum, which means very, very little, and Midas HaRachamim means more. Here the Rebbe says, no, Midas Hadin means too much. And when you get too much, you have nothing. Why? Because Midas Hadin is Teyu, and Midas HaRachamim is Tikkun. So as I said to you earlier, this is a little bit different than the typical Medrash. We're not explaining the Medrash that Midas Hadin means tzimtzum. We're explaining that the Midas Hadin means Tagbaydas, or to use a more philosophical term, it means Ratzei, Aliyah B'Lishuv, Ratzei B'Lishuv. And therefore the Rebbe says on line 42, V'zehu, and this is the meaning, Shera She'nei Elam Eskayim, the world is unsustainable, Ki Mizeh, when the light comes into this world, which is a Gilui of the Mahus, of Atzma Sein Seif, with a Tagberes, and a Yachaliyas Tikkun Elam, the world cannot exist in an orderly fashion. The world cannot exist in such a way that the light goes into the vessels and joins with the vessels. And so long as the light cannot come down into the vessels and join with the vessels, you don't have a world. Continues the Rebbe on line 43, in order for there to be a world. And that the world should be in a way of tikkun, where the light comes into the vessels, rather than running out of the vessels. They should create a tikkun. And tikkun means order. Tikkun means integration. Tikkun means interconnectedness and interdependence and harmony. Hainu bechinas kaven, that you have various different poles. A right pole which is chesed, a left pole which is gevura, an essential pole which is teferes, and his skalulus hamidas ebezeh, an integration between each midah with every other midah. Who and what facilitates this? Bechinas ribi kelim u'miyoteir. When you have more vessels and less light, so that the light comes into the vessels in the kind of way that it settles in the vessels. And not only does the light come into the vessel in the way that it settles in the vessel, but the light comes into the vessel in such a way that it divides. The chesed aspect within the light is in the chesed aspect of the kli, and the gevura aspect within the light goes into the gevura aspect within the kli. Moreover, each keli has every midah, and therefore the chesed within midas ha-chesed gets the chesed aspect within that oyer. The gevura in midas ha-chesed gets the gevura aspect within that oyer, and in midas ha-gevura it's the same thing. So every keli has a little bit of every other keli, and therefore they join together and they create a harmony, and this is Elam Atik. The light and life is not coming with that kind of a force, which is a force of Teihu, which is a force of his Gabras, or a force of Aliyah, Nistalkus, and Ratzu. Rak Bechinas Chesed. It comes in a kind and a gentle way, but it is cold. And of course, cold in this case means measured. That allows for Chesed and Gevurah to be cooperative and to be together, because there is this iskalulus. So the idea of the Eibishter creating the world from Midas Hadin is Teyu, and the idea the Eibishter creating the world from Midas HaRachamim is Tikkun. This is a very unusual understanding of this Maamar Chazal. And then he brings another Maamar Chazal and again explains it unusual. Maamar Chazal, like it says in Pirkei Avos, that we all know the Mishnah, right? Asara Deires Adam v'ad Neach. There's 10 generations from Adam to Neach. Liadi kamo erech apayim lefonav, to show us how much Rachmanas the Eibishter has. Erech apayim, he prolongs his anger. Shekol adeiris hayamachisen oboin, Hashem was angry, and he didn't punish them until he brought the Mabul. And then, of course, Asara Deiris Minech Vad Avram, again, Liadi kama erech apayim lefonav, Shekol hadeiris hayamachisen oboin, Achaba Avram Avinu v'kibus charkulam. So what sustained the word for those 20 generations? Arechampen. Okay, now I'm going to jump ahead. Now, what is Arechampen? What is Mairich Af in Kabbalah? Arechampen is Keser. Keser sounds like Tikkun or like Tehu. So look how it all is upside down over here. Liadi kama erech apayim lefonav, to show us how much Hashem prolonged, withheld his anger. Hashem was angry. Avram came along and he translates. What's the Taich Erech HaPayim? Tikkun. Because the Mides in the first 20 generations was not too strong, therefore this is what provided the possibility for the Eibishter's prolonging his anger and his tolerance and not punishing them. And this is 180 degrees opposite of the typical Maamar Chassidus. Most Maamar Chassidus will tell you that the Erech HaPayim of the first 26 generations came from Kesed. And that's why the first 1,000 years was Nizam Chassidishe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, came from Kesed, Me'el Matayu. In this Maamar, everything is explained backwards. That in the first 26 generations, because the Eibishter's kindness was measured, it didn't destroy the world. If the Eibishter's kindness had been, in other words, from Tikkun, as opposed to from Tayu, that's how the world was able to be sustained. If it came in Eifin of Takbeidus, the world would not been able to tolerate it. V'adarabah, because it was Erech HaPayim, because the Eibishter measured the chesed that he gave the world, that it should be limited. And again, here Erech HaPayim means something very different than it means in so many Maamar Chassidus that explain this very Maamar Chazal. And in this case, it means that it was the chayas was limited. Yochaliyas b'nei hafchim, but tachlis, two opposites could cohabit. Two opposites could exist at the same time. And because two opposites existed at the same time, the Eibush was able to tolerate their avedas. And he gives you an example. And again, I'm repeating the example he's about to give you is brought in many Maamar Chassidus. And it's always brought in conjunction with Erech HaPayim, and it's always associated with Kesed. Over here he brings the same example, associated with Erech HaPayim, but in this Maamar, it's not how Erech HaPayim is Kesed, but Faket Erech HaPayim, because it's what they call Chesed B'Kridus. We know about the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Hashem was very happy. When Shlomo Melech said Shir HaShirim, from the time Hashem created the world, there was never such happiness. Was the pasuk says, the house of God was filled with the glory of God. In other words, the fire came from heaven and revealed itself in the Beis HaMikdash. Translates the Alter Rebbe, Hainu Bechinas Gilu Yashchina Lamata, the Shechina was revealed below. Nimtza thus, Shaya Simcha Rabameh, there was incredible joy, Lamaila, Vaharaya, there was great Gilu. Says the Rebbe, Valesia Peirik Nemer, about that very same time, it says in Chazal, based on a pasuk, Kial Api Val Chamosi Hoysa Li, Ha'ir Hazeis, Lemin Hayem Ashabanoes, that I've been angry from the moment I built the Beis HaMikdash. From the moment the Beis HaMikdash was built, Hashem was angry. Why? So it says in Chassidus that at the moment of the building of the Beis HaMikdash, there was a fusion of incredible kindness, which manifested in the Eibishter resting in the Beis HaMikdash and celebrating Kvayach with the Jewish people. And also anger because Shlomo HaMelech took Bas Pareh. So how is it explained in this Maamar? In this Maamar, it's explained the reason these two midas can be at the same time, because they're both chalosh, they're both weak. Why are they weak? Because they come from Tikkun. And there's different levels in this weakness. One level of this weakness is because the Kalim are weak. The Kalim weaken it. Another level is because the Moichin weaken it. But it's certainly not from Kesed. Nimtza turns out, two opposite midas exist at the very same time. What allowed for two opposite midas to exist at the same time? So in the previous page, he called it Erech HaPayim, and he explained it to mean that the midas are b'medida v'agbolas from Elamatik. So he explains it now why the Shashid of midas harachamim he fused into the creation midas harachamim. And what is rachamim? Medida v'agbola. What is rachamim? Tikkun, not too much. V'nasa Elamatik, and he created a world of order. And Yachali Siskalos hamidas zebazeh. There's a room and a possibility for the various different midas to be integrated. Since each midah, since each measure is not revealed and overflowing with an incredible amount of force, which would not tolerate another midah, it can't really go into a keli, and it's really in a direction of running away. But in this case, you didn't have such kind of a takbeidus. Imkain, therefore, hakli hoisa yahoichel hakel, the vessel can hold the eid. Moreover, gam geza bechinas yachad, they can hold both eidos together. Why? Because in chesed there's gvur, and gvur there's chesed, and because mitzad the keli there's eskalus, the eid is joined together through the keli, and chesed has gvur has chesed, and so forth. So in kedusha there's weakness. And because in Kedusha there's weakness, in Kedusha there's integration. And because in Kedusha there's weakness and there's integration, there's also Adam, there's also normalcy. And that would be the equivalent of a Yeshaveh learning in Davening. And he continues, Vihine. We just talked about the creation. We talked about the Beis HaMikdash. We talked about Ishtalshalos. Now let's talk about a person. That nishmas ha'adam, the neshama of the person, the godly soul, comes from Atzilus Elam HaTikun, a world of order. Atzilus is Ein Sof, but Atzilus is a gila of the ha'ara of the Mehus of Ein Sof, rather than a gila of the etzem of the Mehus of Ein Sof. In Atzilus, the Eid is more limited. What is the benefit of the Eid of Atzilus being more limited? That the Eid goes into Keli, and it can even be his kalos, as we described before. Which is why the Nefesh Elokis also has every single midah. But Tanya, this explained in Tanya. L'cheire means pei gimel, but I'm not sure. In the Maamar Chassidus they bring that the neshama is min hal yenim and tachtenim, like the Eibishter, which has every single midah. But the argument is the fact that every neshama has every single midah. Yeah, but of course the Gersa Kedesh should base, the Gersa Kedesh should gimel. What Alter Rebbe talks about the skala midas is because of chalishas, because the midas are weak. Mash'enkein, as opposed to Elam HaTeyu. Elam HaTeyu is polar. It's takbeidus. It's extreme. And because it's extreme, there's no possibility for more than one midah. And he gives you, first of all, an example from the malachim and the animals. And then, of course, his point is, this is how it is by the nefesh habahamis. Mash'enkein ha-malachim mishashim bechinas Elam HaTeyu. Malachim come from Elam HaTeyu. Machane Michal, the camp of Michal. Machane Gavriel, the camp of Gavriel. And here we say, Kol echad b'kav b'fnei atzmi, each one has his own pole. Machane Michal urak b'chinas Ahava. Michal is only love. There's no gvura whatsoever. And the midas Ahava is by his gabras made is very powerful. Machane Gavriel urak b'chinas Yira. The camp of Gavriel is only Yira, but by his gabrus rav, with incredible amount of force. In other words, sar shel mayim v'sar shel eish, and there's no tolerance. Eisa shalom b'mreimov is a nes. Why? Because water and fire should never get along. They're arch enemies. Michal and Gavriel should never get along. They're arch enemies. They only get along because of the Yebishter. But in and of themselves, each one has no room for the other because of the takbeidus. So by a Adam, each midah is limited, and therefore you have a combination of all of the midas. And by a Malach and a Behema, it's not this way. Continues the Rebbe, this comes down into the chariot and the spiritual worlds of Pnei Yadi, Elayamin, Pnei Sheir V'Geim, the face of the lion, to the right, the face of the ox, to the left, each midah is by itself. And of course, what you need to add now further is, from the Pnei Yadi and the Sheir comes the physical animal, the Ari and the Sheir, that they come from the Malachim, which come from Elam HaTeyu, and as a result, each midah is polar, it's extreme, there's no tolerance and integration and sharing and so forth and so on. When you talk about the neshama, the Chazal tells Gimel, father and mother and the Eibishter. But that's only the nefesh elokis. When you're talking about the chayes of the animal soul, where does the animal soul get its chayes from? I'm reading words into the Maamar that are, I think you have to read in, that the physical animals, as well as the nefesh habahamis of a yid. So v'chayes, nefesh habehemes v'ha'efes. The vitality of the soul of animals and birds. Is from the face of the lion, the face of the ox, as it is in the Merkava. They don't come from Atzilus. The Neshama comes from Adam, from Atzilus, and the animals and the Nefesh HaBahamis come from Tev. Which is why it says about the person, he was created last and first. When you're talking about tikkun and ishtalshalos, Adam is the highest thing. Atzilus is higher than Bria. Kedusha is higher than Klipa. In the framework of tikkun, Adam is the highest thing, but that's only in Elam HaTikkun. And when you go to their source in Elam HaTeyu, it's a much higher level. Animals, and therefore the animal soul, comes from a much higher level, which comes from the world of Teilif, Melech, Melech, V'Geme, before there's any kings in Kedusha, Kaneda, as it is known, as we discussed earlier in the Maamar. And the Rebbe's point is, this is the pshat, a Yebal Asik over a Yeshavel. You're a business person, you're living in what's called the real world, you're spending so much of your neshama on parnasa, but you insist on being a yid nevertheless and serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The powers of Elam HaTeyu, which are not at all real to the Ben Teira and to the Yeshav El, which are very real to you, you're able to transform. And therefore, says the Rebbe on line 76, when the animal soul is harnessed to love Hashem, as it happens in the businessman who contemplates his life and his struggles and his challenges and his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when he reveals that Ahava Ulamayla, my law, it is much higher than the love could be from the Neshama and from the Adam and from Tikkun. How much higher, says the Alter Rebbe, it's Bechinas B'chol Meidach. It comes from level B'chol Meidach Shalamayla, Makli, which is above the vessel. Mipnei shehu b'cheila yatir, who comes with an incredible amount of force. Shabab is Gabrus, Rav, the very same is Gabrus, which made Elam HaTeyu so destructive, now makes the Ahava to the Eibishter of the Yeshiv Eilu, of the Baal Asik, of the businessman, who harnesses his Nefesh HaBahamis, the same as Gabrus Rav emerges. Shesherish Nefesh HaBahamis B'chinas HaTeyu Kanal, as described the animal soul Sherish is from Teyu. Rakshin Nafla B'Shviras HaKelim Lamata Mata Miyedid has fallen very low to Shviras HaKelim. Bavei, the Gashmias in our physical service, Lias Nifrad, that we should be separate from a Lakuz. And of course, in this case, it means the person that because of his incredible concern and preoccupation with Parnasa, doesn't have time for Avodas Hashem. And of course, we all grew up hearing the argument. The argument is that La'avaya Ha'aretzum Laya, the world belongs to Hashem, and there can be no contradictions in Hashem's world. So if Hashem wants you to serve Him, and Hashem gave you nisaynis, it means that you could serve Him. Now, of course, this is easy to say and incredibly difficult to do. So until a person says this, and until a person does this, the being in this world is how Shviras HaKelim has brought about an incredible nefila. Ava, but when a person overcomes that and says, no, I'm a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in spite of my challenges, and he davens like a businessman davens, when he brings clarity and he raises all of this up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in davening, he's an incredible amount of strengthening, and it's an ahava, an infinite love. And he compares it to the Maamar Chazal that the Gemara says, where of course the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya Perek Zayin. Somebody asked a question and he wasn't answered immediately because the Torah didn't eat meat. In order for me to answer this kasha, in Torah I have to eat meat first. Now of course meat is not exactly holy. Nimta, this teaches us eating the meat, which is in and of itself klipa. But when the meat is then used in Avodas Hashem, Adam adds strength and additional intelligence to the person, and he's able to answer a question that otherwise he couldn't answer. As the Pasuk says, wine and meat brings joy to a person's heart. As we see it in reality, Lamata in Tikkun, in Ishtalshalos, Ha'adam b'madreg ve'yeser mehem, the Adam aspect of the person is even higher than the Behem aspect of the person. Ve'ein arech v'cholu. Ava b'sharsha, but in their root, heim l'maylim b'chinas ha'adam, the Tehu and the Nisyanis have a higher source, Shem Elam HaTehu, and they need to be overcome and reversed and compensated for. So we're going to stop at this point. In Mitzvah Hashem, in the next class, we'll continue learning more of this biur on the Maamar of the Alter Rebbe about the davening of the Baal Asik, of the businessman.